Thank you very much. Professor Labrinoudakis has already explained the close association of the island of Delos with the earth, with the sea, and with the sky. So in my short talk, I will take you to a trip that will bring us from the sea to the sky and then back to earth. So fasten your seatbelts and let us start. When the ancient Greeks looked at a map, they didn't see a map of the Aegean, they didn't see lonely islands. They saw groups of islands. They saw a group of 12 islands and they named them the Dodecanes, the 12 islands. They saw islands that looked like the seed that falls on the fields by farmers, and they called them the scattered islands, the Sporades. And they saw islands that formed a circle around the sacred island of Delos, and they called them Kyklades, the Cyclades, the circular dance of the islands, exactly as the circular dances of the girls about which Professor Labrinoudakis has already spoken. The dances that were performed by sacred envoys of the Ionian cities. When the Greeks looked at the sky, again, they didn't see lonely stars. They saw groups of stars. They saw constellations. They saw the Pleiades dancing against stars as the firmament follows its circular movement around the year, and as the sun and the moon also follow their circular movement in time. And some of these constellations are again very closely associated with precisely the two gods of the island of the star, the Delos, associated with Artemis and Apollo. They saw the Orion, who was in myth a hunter, who was either loved or killed by Artemis, the one doesn't necessarily exclude the other, who was turned into a constellation. They saw the Gemini, who are Hercules, and Apollo wrestling for the tripod in Delphi. They saw the Great Bear, which is no other than Calliste, companion of Artemis, who was raped by Zeus, or at any way she had sex with Zeus. We don't know whether this was rape or not, so let's not follow a verdict. And because of that, again, she was turned into a bear and later into a star. They saw the lyra, the lyre that was originally constructed by Hermes and then was given to Apollo and turned into a star. They saw Orpheus, who was turned into a constellation by Apollo after he was killed by the Bacchants. They saw the Corvus, which was a raven that was sent by Apollo to fetch water, but instead discovered some night figs, waited until they are ripe enough to be eaten, and delayed the fulfillment of his mission, and was punished by Apollo. He was turned into a star. Next to him you see Hydra, that prevents him from drinking water from the crater, from the cup. And I could go on and on with similar constellations that are directly associated with the gods of this island, for instance with the Ophiuchos, who is nothing else than Asclepios, or with Virgo, who was regarded a daughter of Apollo that died at a young age, or the Sagitta, which is the bow of Apollo with which Apollo killed those who had killed his son Asclepios, and so on and so forth. So the sky, the dark sky, the sky without the full moon, is in a sense a mythological handbook. For the Greeks, a mythological handbook that is directly associated with these two gods. Long before NASA sent astronauts, male and now female, to the sky, Apollo and Artemis had sent to the sky their lovers, family members, enemies, and so on. Let's now take a trip back to the earth from the sky. As a historian, I wish I had a time machine. I don't, but I use ancient inscriptions as my time machine. And ancient inscriptions that tell us stories. These are true stories. So again, fasten your seatbelts for a rapid trip. First of all, we'll make a stop around 200 BC. What do you find in a dark night? I choose on purpose a dark night because for the Greeks, the dark night, the night of the new moon is more important than the full night. I know a lot of people in ancient Greece who were called Numenios, the one born on the day of the new moon, but I don't know anyone who was called Panselinos, the one who was born on the night of the full moon. So it is a dark night. We're in Delos around 200 BC. What do we find here? We find, first of all, people celebrating private clubs, their drinking parties, their symposia. But we also find nocturnal dances. We know from the inventories of the temple that there were dedications of torches, lampades, that were dedicated in the temple after the dance was performed. From this we know that these are nocturnal dances, not dances during the day. And there is a variety of new festivals that were introduced by private sponsors at that time. The festival of Demetria, of Ptolemaia, and so on. They commemorate the name of the people who donated them, that is, donated the money for the celebration of the festival, but there are also festivals that commemorate divinities, the Apollonia, the festival of Apollo, the Artemisia, the dance in honor of Artemis, the Britomartia, the dance in honor of Britomartis, and so on. I cannot promise you that you will certainly find a nocturnal dance in any day of the month, but there are certainly enough nights in which you will find celebrants in Delos. What you might also find in Delos around this time is an Egyptian priest who has just imported the cult of Serapis from Egypt to Delos, and he is facing a lawsuit from the local priests who don't like the idea of an intruder, a refugee, you might say, or an illegal immigrant from Egypt in Delos. And he sees in his dream, we know this from an inscription, the god who appears and promises to him that he's going to be successful in the lawsuit. And we know that allegedly the opponents lost their speech during the trial, and the cult of Serapis survived, and we have the Serapeion in Delos. Let's fasten our seatbelts again and move another 100 years in time, around 100 BC. What do we see in a dark night in Delos at that time? We see a change. We see, for instance, a Jewish family on a Friday evening lighting the menorah, the seven-armed lamp, because there are Jews living in Delos at that time. We see Italian immigrants that have come after Delos had become a free port in 146 for business purposes. They organize themselves in private clubs and they celebrate banquets, symposia, and so on during the night. But we also find a Syrian woman who has lost her bracelet and suspects that someone has stolen it. And she writes on a lead tablet a curse or a prayer for justice, which is not addressed to Artemis or Apollo, but it is addressed, why should they care whether she lost her bracelet or not? She addresses her prayer to the gods of Sikon, probably a small village in Syria, and to the Dea Syria, the Thea Syria, the Syrian goddess, because she hopes that her own goddess is going to be angry at the injustice that she has just suffered. And she curses the man, she assumes that it's a man, who had stolen her bracelet, and says, let him suffer on his knees, on his sweet parts, whatever this means, his hands, and so on and so forth. And this is a curse tablet that was found in a house in Delos. In another house, some people are playing dice or knuckle bones, and someone writes on the wall, Demetrius is blind. He doesn't see that Hermes is cheating him. But we also go to a very small, dark room where a slave lives. One of the many slaves that live in Delos permanently and are not only brought here to be sold. We know that around this time, approximately 10,000 slaves were sold every day. And this slave comes from Asia Minor, and during the dark night he remembers the place where he was born, Antioch on the Meander. And he writes on the wall of this small dark room, Antioch full of figs and water, and then he prays to Meander, today's Menderes, their local river, to give fertility and wealth and water. What do we learn from all this? we learn that at some point Delos stopped being Adelos, stopped moving around as an island, and became a stable place. But this is the only stable thing in this story, because there is an internal movement of the stars and the firmament. There is also an internal movement of people. And Delos changes long time before we, social historians, invented the word multicultural. Delos was a multicultural place, a place where we find inscriptions not only in Greek, but also in Latin and in Semitic languages and in Phoenician, for instance, Phoenician dedications, and also bilingual texts. It is an international place. And I think that this is a very good connection with what we experience today. It is not only the changes that are brought by human agency, migration, political changes, the attack of pirates, and so on, but also the agency of nature, which is not necessarily independent of human agency. We experience, for instance, global warming that will certainly affect the future of Delos. And I think that this is something that we should take from the ALPHA mission and from the meeting today, the continual movement of life, despite the fact that this island has not changed its position since the time that Zeus decided to ask his brother for birth assistance for his lover. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much for this fascinating.